Welcome back, everybody. Bearded Brother Matt here to guide you through yet another Trade Dissection. Today's topic is honestly pretty interesting in the same way a train wreck is interesting. You can see it coming, you don't want to watch, and you can't look away. I really toyed with the idea of calling this video How to Destroy Two Franchises with One Trade, but kind of discarded it. So today, we're going to look at that time the Toronto Raptors traded away their biggest superstar in their history, Vince Carter. Now, some younger viewers that we have, or rather don't have at this point in time, might not understand just how good VC was, especially to begin his career. Just, if you want to see how ridiculously good this guy was, look up the honey dip dunk, watch that entire dunk contest, and then realize he pulled off dunks like that in game. It was just ridiculous. His 6 years as a member of the Toronto Raptors were marked with huge success and some odd issues. He brought them to their first ever playoffs. He brought them to their first ever playoff series victories. He got the Raptors within a single shot of going to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2001. However, that would be where odd issues would crop up, as that run was mired in controversy, as the same day the final game, Game 7, would take place, Carter would decide to keep a promise to his mother and attend his college graduation that morning. That night, he would shoot poorly, and at the end of regulation, he had an open shot, lined it up, and bounced it off the rim long. In 2001, he would sign a major contract extension. The success individually would continue to pile up for Vince, but team success would flounder. Injuries would shorten his 2002-2003 season, and things would deteriorate further upon his return. At the end of the 03-04 season, Raptors GM Glenn Grunwald and his entire management team would be cleaned out. Vince really wanted the Raptors to hire Julius Erving as the next GM. They brought him in for an interview and immediately discarded him and then hired their guy. Vince was not happy. And being unhappy, a new management group decided their best option was to trade him. Here's how it all went down. The Raptors would trade him to the New Jersey Nets, and that was all the Nets were going to get in that deal. What did they get back? They got back power forward / center Aaron Williams, small forward / shooting guard Eric Williams, center Alonzo Mourning, a first rounder in 2005 that would be 16th overall, and a first rounder in 2006 that would be 20th overall. That's a pretty big package. Well, if you give up the best player in a deal, so let's go look at how New Jersey made out with this. Now, the Nets got Vince Carter. The issue was that when they got him, despite having Jason Kidd and several other good pieces, they were in the middle of slashing payroll and emptying out. They had just been bought by Brett Ratner, and he was going to eventually move the team to Brooklyn. And that was just the way they were headed. They had been in a finals or close to a finals recently, lost out to Detroit, who went to the finals and actually beat the Lakers that year. So they were in the process of getting ready to empty out. And then Carter became available. And they decided to pivot and immediately take a swing for the fences while they still had Jason Kidd. They made several more playoff appearances, but they never did make it over the hump into the finals. In 2007, Carter would re-sign with the Nets for another 4 years. However, in the 07-08 season, Kidd would be traded away. Carter got points for stepping up and leading the Nets in his absence. However, the following season, he would also be traded away. The Nets made a decision, and they pulled the plug and tried to empty out for a rebuild and moving the team. The Magic, at the time, had a superstar in Dwight Howard, and they really hoped that a Howard and Carter pairing could bring them to success in the playoffs. So the deal was made. Vince Carter and Ryan Anderson would be traded to the Orlando Magic for Courtney Lee, Tony Battie, and Rafer Alston. Two of them would walk in free agency. That would be Alston and Battie. They were okay players. Alston would eventually come back to Toronto at another point in time in his career. That's a whole nother side of everything. Courtney Lee, however, was traded in a massive 4-team deal. That deal goes as follows. The teams involved were the Nets, the Pacers, the Rockets, and the Hornets. The Hornets get Trevor Ariza from the Rockets. The Rockets get Courtney Lee from the Nets. The Pacers get Darren Collison and James Posey from the Hornets. And the Nets would get Troy Murphy from the Pacers. Did you follow all that? Good. So Troy Murphy is a net for 18 games. The Nets would then package Murphy in a second-round pick in 2012 and send them to the Golden State Warriors for Brendan Wright and Dan Gadzurich. Neither of them were ever trading, and this ends the dissection for the Nets. The second rounder? You want to know about the second rounder? Are you really sure? I mean, okay. That second round pick ended up being 35th overall and turned into Draymond Green. Yeah, I'm willing to bet the Nets wish they had that pick back. So, this deal didn't really go all that great for the Nets. They had some playoff success, but they never did make the finals again. They never even made the ECF again, the Eastern Conference Finals. And, I mean, they took a swing and they whiffed. And if this trade goes incredibly well for Toronto, they're going to end up with a lot of egg on their face. Is that what happened? I'm going to spoil you now. In a short word, no. Start off, Alonzo Mourning never played a single game for Toronto. What happened? Well, after being traded, he never reported and ended up with the team saying that he did not meet the minimum medical requirements. And they bought him out. He would almost immediately go to Miami and play on the veterans minimum for the rest of the season. He would, by the way, win an NBA championship down there. The rest? Well, here we go. Aaron Williams. He played primarily at center during his short tenure in Toronto. He would be traded the season after they got him to the New Orleans Hornets. Well, I say New Orleans Hornets, but it's really New Orleans and Oklahoma City Hornets, as this was the 05-06 season. What did they get? 2 second-round picks. They got the 56th overall pick in 2006. That turned into Eden Bafjic. I'm sure I screwed that name up, but he never played in the NBA. So, there you go. Now, the 2009 pick was traded. It was 51st overall. Where did that get traded? Well, now we have to go talk about Eric Williams. Eric Williams floated around in the lineup, and at this point in his career was a bench player. He didn't play every game and just kind of seemed to be there. In the 06-07 season, they would package him with Matt Bonner, that pick, the 2009 51st overall pick, which was Jack McClinton, and send him to the San Antonio Spurs. What did they get back? Rasho Nesterovic. Now, Rasho earned the nickname Nesty in Toronto because they thought it was refreshing to actually have an actual center. Sadly, he was decent, but never really great. Toronto would trade him after the 07-08 season. He'd be packaged along with TJ Ford, Maceo Baston, and a freshly picked Roy Hibbert. And they would send that to the Indiana Pacers. What would they get back? Jermaine O'Neal and a freshly picked Nathan Jawai. Man, on paper, this deal makes sense. O'Neal was about what he was the previous season, but it was kind of a far cry from the all-star Toronto had hoped that he would become again. He averaged closer to 13 points a game instead of the 19 or 20 points that he had averaged during his all-star seasons, and kind of didn't look like the Jermaine O'Neal of before. So they would end up trading him. They would package him with Jamario Moon and a 2010 round 2 pick and a 2011 first round pick, which would be 5th overall. Let's talk about that real quick. The 2nd overall pick became Deshaun Butler, and the 5th overall pick was Jonas Valanciunas. Funny thing about that is that was actually Toronto's pick because they would get it back from the team they traded it to later on. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. They would trade that to the Miami Heat for Marcus Banks and Shawn Marion. Now, Marion would actually be a pretty good player for them. He would continue to put up similar numbers to what he had most of his career for them. However, he is going to get traded, and we're going to have to get to that in a minute. So let's clean up Marcus Banks. Banks was the 13th overall pick in his draft class and never really kind of lived up to that. He was kind of a bench player, very meh for the Raptors, and they would trade him just a few years later. They packaged him with David Anderson and Miles Jack and sent him to the New Orleans Hornets for Jared Bayless and Peja Stojakovic. Bayless was an actual good backup point guard who provided spark up off the bench. He would leave in free agency, sadly. And Peja Stojakovic, well, Peja was pretty far removed from the All-Star he had been 8 years prior in Sacramento. He would play 2 games for the Raptors and then get released. He would sign with Dallas, retire at the end of the season, and that was kind of how he closed out his career. Let's not forget how good he was in Sacramento, though. Automatic from beyond the three-point line. Just a fantastic player. Well, Marion would play out that season in Toronto. And then he would get traded in a sign-in trade that involves 4 teams and Nathan Jawai. So, Shawn Marion, Nathan Jawai, a 2016 second-round pick, 57th overall that would turn into Wang Jalen, and Chris Humphries would get thrown into a 4-team blender. Yes, it's another one of those. This is a 4-team trade. Here we go. Get ready. The Orlando Magic are involved in this, and they would get cash from both Toronto and Dallas. The Memphis Grizzlies would get Jerry Stackhouse from Dallas and this second-round pick. The Mavericks would get Chris Humphries, Nathan Jawai, Shawn Marion from Toronto. They'd also get Greg Buckner from the Grizzlies. What would Toronto get out of this? Devon George and Antoine Wright from the Mavericks, along with Hedo Turkoglu from the Orlando Magic. Whew. Did you follow that one? I hope so, because that one was weird. Now, George would get flipped 20 days after being acquired. They'd send him straight up to the Golden State Warriors for a young shooting guard named Marco Bellinelli. Bellinelli was actually pretty good. He came off the bench in Toronto, and he would be traded after 1 season for Julian Wright. Julian Wright had been the 13th overall pick. Never really lived up to it. Played 1 season in Toronto before being released. And then played a bunch of ball over in Europe. Antoine Wright played 1 season in Toronto before being released. Came off the bench, was a decent bench player. And that's where his story ends. Hedo Turkoglu. Hedo Turkoglu had been a pretty good player in Orlando for a couple of years and had some value. Sadly, with what was going on in Orlando, he was kind of getting pushed out and wouldn't be able to stay there anymore. So, In a sign and trade deal, as part of this, he would wind up in Toronto, but would never really produce the way that he had in Orlando. They had hoped to be getting the 15 to 19 points per game guy, and instead got a guy who scored around 11 points a game. Regression, anyone? They would trade him one season later to the Phoenix Suns for Leandro Barbosa and Dwayne Jones. Now, Barbosa played 2-ish seasons in Toronto as a very good spark player off the bench. He would be traded, while he was hot, to the Indiana Pacers for a second-round pick, 56th overall in 2012. They would use that pick on Tomislav Zubic, who never played a game in the NBA. Dwayne Jones played for Toronto and would be waived fairly soon after the trade, bringing him in. Now, for the draft picks. Oh, God, I hope you're ready to cry, because they're both going to make you cry if you're a Raptors fan. The first round pick in 2005, 16th overall, was used on small forward Joey Graham. Mostly a meh player. Wasn't ever spectacular. Why will that make you cry? He was picked one pick ahead of small forward all-star Danny Granger. Ouch. Now, the 2006 first round pick, 20th overall, was traded. They would package this pick with Jalen Rose and send it to the New York Knicks for, hey look, Antonio Davis is back. He played 8 games before being waived. Oh, and that pick was used on Ronaldo Bulkman. One pick before perennial All-Star and NBA champion Rajon Rondo. Also, this was the draft where the Raptors had the first overall pick, and they would grab Andrea Bargnani. One pick before perennial All-Star and All-NBA player LaMarcus Aldridge. So like I said, that's where this ends. And that's how this should end, as a steaming pile of garbage. After this, what have we all learned? Sometimes you take a chance and whiff. Sometimes you make a big trade and mismanage everything so badly you never do climb out. I will state that Toronto eventually would climb out when they would land Kawhi Leonard and bring a championship to the team. So yeah, 2 teams, 1 trade, nothing to show for it. Next time, we will move back into the NHL, and I'll introduce you to the wonderful world of Mike Milbury trades. Until then, let us know if you like this content by giving us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you aren't. Turn on your notifications. This is Bearded Brother Matt, signing off. Peace!